Hello and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be going over what I think is the best way to make scrap in Rust. I have lots of guides and I'm going to be showing you which ones are the best for each given scenario in Rust, and I'm also going to be answering a bunch of frequently asked questions on my channel, as well as show you an advanced new technique which will help you with your cloning. Personally, I don't think that one farm outranks the other two by any means. They all have their own advantages, and it's up to you to decide which one will suit your wipe best, because then you can maximize your scrap. I'm only going to go over these farms briefly, so if you want to see the full videos, go into the description and I'll post the links there. So the first farm is the Pickle Farm. It's very simple. You just buy a bunch of pickles from Bandit Camp, put them into a composter, turn it into fertilizer and sell the fertilizer for scrap. Then you can repeat this process and you'll make a profit of 1.5 times every single time you do this. The pros of this farm is that it's got an easy setup, it has medium maintenance, and it has no BPs. The cons are that it's not as high a return as the other farms and it's location fixed, meaning you have to live near Bandit Camp. So therefore the only time I would recommend this farm is if you're playing solo or in a small group on a vanilla server and you already live near Bandit Camp. Otherwise, the other farms are better. Moving on to my next farm, which is a fish farm. With the fish farm, you just go to Bandit Camp, buy a bunch of pickles and put them in your fish traps. Then you farm your fish and sell them to the Bandit Camp for scrap. This will give you 30 times profit on your initial investment in pickles. So the pros to this farm is that it's got an easy setup and it doesn't require any BPs to make, and it has a really high return on the scrap investment. The cons to this is that it requires a lot of maintenance, and this maintenance can get very tiring and boring at times. So if you're strictly looking to make a lot of scrap, then I would highly recommend this farm over the first one. The only downside is that this one requires a lot of maintenance, and it means that you can't play Rust in the meantime. For example, in the first farm, after you set it up, you can go run monuments, you can go farm nodes, do other stuff. Whereas with this farm, once you set it up, you just have to keep maintaining it, because every 5 minutes a new fish will spawn and you'll want to farm it for the most scrap per hour. Moving on to my final farm, this is the hemp farm. To set it up, you need to learn how to crossbreed so that you can plant the most efficient plants, then keep reproducing your plants and sell the cloth that you make from farming hemp to Bandit Camp for scrap. The pros include higher return on scrap, learning how to farm can be fun and rewarding, it requires low maintenance once fully automated, and this benefits modded players. For example, if you're on a 2x server, the cloth you get would be 2 times, and therefore the scrap you get will also be 2 times. This is not the same for the other farms, so if you're on a modded server, I highly recommend you do this farm. The cons include the following. It requires high maintenance until it's fully set up, you need a lot of BPs to make it fully automatic, it's an expensive setup, and crossbreeding is hard and can be frustrating to learn. So when should you use this farm? Well, for starters, if you're on a modded server, I highly recommend you do this farm as opposed to the other two, because all the other farms will still give you vanilla rates, whereas this farm will give you much more. Another reason to consider this farm is that if you enjoy the progression in Rust, then you might actually enjoy this farm. When I first started playing Rust, it was a survival game, and I actually enjoyed the intricate details, and I feel like this is what Facepunch is trying to recapture with the Farming 2.0. Even though I've played the past 2 years of Rust as just a PvP game playing on modded servers, I tried learning how to crossbreed, and it brought me back to the roots of Rust, learning how to play this game as a survival game, and it can quite honestly be very fun. Obviously, if you're a Chad, you can use this farm just for the scrap, that's fine too. Final reason, and the most important one, is that this farm is a scaled farm. Therefore, it requires a lot of work to set up, but once you've set up the automatic process, then you can just keep adding floors and increasing your profits with very little work. It only requires a couple minutes of cloning per harvest, which is every hour and a half to 2 hours, and this frees you up to do other things during that remaining hour and a half. So that means if you set up a 4x4 which gets you around 1.5k scrap per harvest, during that spare hour and a half, you could be hitting the road or running monuments, meaning that you could get another 1.5k scrap manually, as well as your plants which are generating scrap in the background. So to sum up on my 3 farms, if you're on a modded server, always go for the hemp farm. If you're on a vanilla server, you have to ask yourself if this farm is going to be worth the setup. A general rule of thumb is if you think you can set this farm up in the first half of your wipe, then it's probably going to be worth it. For example, if you're a large group, you could probably easily set this up in a couple of hours, which will yield you scrap for the rest of the day and rest of the following days if you decide to play for a couple of days. However, if you're a solo on a high pop server and you don't have any BPs, it's probably going to take you a couple of days to be able to set this up. So if you're a solo on a high pop server, you probably have to play for at least a week for this farm to be worth it. Now, if you decided that the hemp farm is not worth your time, then I would recommend one of the other two. The only time that you should go for the composting over the fish farm is if you can't be bothered to be running around manually picking up fish. If you want to be able to play Rust whilst your farm works in the background, then stay away from the fish farm as this requires too much labour. However, it's up to you to decide whether you want more scrap or you want more free time to actually play Rust. I hope that clears up the question on which farm is the best, as they all have their unique advantages, and this is the most common comment that I get in my videos. Previously, by hoarding horses, you could get a lot of fertilizer for your grow rooms. However, because people were using this to sell fertilizer for scrap and there were no more horses around, Facepalms decided to nerf the horse dung rate. Therefore, the easiest way to get fertilizer is by buying a lot of pickles and just turning that into fertilizer. Although this costs a little bit of scrap, because your plants are now growing faster, this will actually increase your overall scrap profit. No, you only have to account for the genes inside of that one planter box. So it doesn't matter if the planter boxes are touching, if they're extremely close, far away, they won't interact with each other. As soon as the plant reaches sapling stage, you can clone it. And yes, you should clone it straight away, as there's no advantage as to waiting longer. The only way you can get more clones per plant is by having more Y genes. A regular plant with no Y genes will give you 2 clones, and for every extra 2 Y genes you have, you'll get another clone. As you can see here, I have 4 plants. The first plant has 0 Y genes, the second one has 2, the third one has 4, and the final one has 6. After they reach sapling stage, the first one will give me 2, the second one will give me 3, 4, and 5. What happens if I had an odd number of Y genes? Well, you round down. So if you had 1 Y gene, it would essentially count as 0. If you had 3 Y genes, it would count as 2. The simple answer to this question is yes, all 3 of those will affect your plant's growth speed. However, I get a lot of comments where people are misinformed and they don't actually understand how they affect your growth speed. Not including its genetics, the overall condition of the plant will determine its growth speed. So in this case, the plant will grow at 93% of its potential. You know how they say a chain is only as strong as its weakest link? Well, this applies to plants. Above the overall are 4 other conditions, and the lowest value of those 4 will determine the overall. As you can see, the first 3 are all at 100%, but then the 4th one is at 93%. Because 93% is the lowest value, that will determine the overall. So for example, if ground was only at 67%, then overall would drop down to 67%. So therefore, we only have to worry about these 3 factors when they drop below one of the others. For example, if you're not using fertilizer and your ground is capped at 67%, it doesn't matter if you overwater your plants because the water will only drop to 71%. Because getting a lot of fertilizer can be quite a time-consuming task after the horse nerf, I completely understand if you don't want to use fertilizer, but that means that you don't have to worry about overwatering your plants. As you can see, it's going to be capped at 67% anyway. And the only time you should worry about temperature is when it drops below the lowest value. So in this case, it would have to drop below 67% for me to care about it. And the only time it'll do this is late at night. And because night's shorter than day, it's not worth me adding H genes to replace my good genes. However, if you're in a colder environment and you find that your temperature is constantly dropping below the other values, then maybe pick up 1 or 2 H genes. One of the most common questions I get is asking if the design is patched. If you go into the pinned comment in YouTube, I will always give you my updates or any new things that I find, including whether or not the design is patched. If you see nothing in the pinned comment, then assume that the design works perfectly as if it did when I first made the video. Ceiling lights will shine down their light to a maximum of 2 floors. This means that if you place your ceiling lights on the 2nd floor, the planters on the 1st floor will still receive light. The only issue I had with this is that ceiling lights cast their light out in a spherical shape. This means that whilst the full of the top floor will get light, the bottom floor will only get light in the center parts because the outer ones don't fall in that sphere. You can muck around with this and try and come up with an efficient design yourself. However, because I use 2x2s, you can see that the outer edges of my bottom 2x2 won't be getting any light. The only way to fix this was to add more lights, and at that point you might as well just have a set of lights per floor. However, if your design is unique, you might come up with a more efficient way. If you've set up a large-scale hemp farm, you know that cloning is one of the things that takes up the most time. So in this advanced trick, I'm going to show you the fastest way to clone your hemp. When you're cloning your hemp, if you have 7 out of 9 slots filled up in an arrangement like I've done here, in the final 2 slots you can place any 2 random seeds and wait for them to reach crossbreeding stage. That means if you keep replacing the 7 with the perfect clone, and then wait for the final two to reach crossbreeding stage, they will always adopt the perfect clone and they won't change the perfect clone in any way. This isn't essential, however it does give you a few extra clones if you have some spare seeds lying around. And the final thing that you might have noticed is when you're cloning plants, it takes a while because you have to hold E and then click take clone. This has a 0.2 second delay, which doesn't sound long, but it starts to stack up as you have lots of plants. So a way to fix this is by changing the hold time to 0. If you go into console, you can type hold time space 0, and then when you hold E, you don't actually have to hold it, you just tap E and it'll automatically open up the window. This saves you 0.2 seconds every single time you clone a plant. However, this means that when you try and open tool cupboards or doors or things like that, it can be quite a nuisance. So remember to set this back to 0.2 seconds when you're done with it. Or what I prefer to do is just leave it at 0.1 because 0.1 is fast enough to clone and it also allows you to open doors and things like that. Of course, this is completely up to you, so play around with it and see what works for you. Tips and tricks like this are frequently coming up in my Discord along with answers to very individual questions, so if you aren't already a member of my Discord, then come join now because then you can ask your questions as well as see new tips and tricks as soon as they come out. That concludes the end of this video. Thanks so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.